Welcome to the Creative Play and Podcast Network. Join us as we share our favorite RPGs, one-shot games, tabletop games, reviews, and convention panels. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Kelly, aka Trixie from Ragnarok and Roll, a Scion to Ragnarok story, and Tilda Wimblewick from D&D Journey of the 5th Edition. First off, I would just like to say thank you to everyone for listening to our varied adventures, as well as for rating us on iTunes and RPGpodcast.com. If you haven't rated us yet, we would greatly appreciate it if you could. And if you're looking for more ways to support our efforts, we are now on Patreon, a great site where you can help us continue making more podcasts, as well as some special surprises for our patrons. If you can, please look us up at www.patreon.com/cppn. Every little bit helps. And again, thank you for listening.
Regional advisor for the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators here in Arizona. So if anybody's writing for kids or thinking about writing for kids, that's a great supportive organization with a lot of resources that you get for your membership without even the activities that I support and put on and the webinars and all of that. So we have free Kidlit Mingle groups that meet all over the state, and we have a group in TusCon specifically, as well as other places, and we also meet on Zoom. So illustrators as well as writers can find opportunities with SCBWI if you're thinking about writing for kids, or if you do write for kids, or if you're thinking whatever you're writing is turning into a Kidlit book. And I want to right now put a kibosh on anybody's thinking that kid books are easy and that, oh yeah, kids, anybody can write for kids, because it ain't true. Picture books are the hardest format, to be honest with you. They're very, very difficult because if you're not also an illustrator, you have to be thinking in terms of leaving room for the illustrations, but also the format itself, the page turn, everything about a picture book is part of the storytelling. It's part of structure for picture books, so they're very hard and they're very competitive. Novels for middle grade are novels, and they're good, solid novels, and you have to have your craft intact and do all the things. You just have to make sure that the goals and the concerns and the barriers that you throw in the way for your characters are age appropriate. And with middle grade, you're not looking at quite as many subplots and threads because they can only hold so much. And then when you get into young adult, we start dealing with some really important topics. And so I do write across the ages from picture book on up to adult. My niche is pretty much speculative fiction, fantasy in particular, some science fiction, paranormal, and now I've added a little bit of light horror, dark fantasy, and with some humorous twists to this book. That's my newest book, Blood from a Rose. It just came out in September, and it's short fiction and poetry. So that's a bunch about me. And I've been doing this writing stuff for a long time. I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. When I was in 4th grade, I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. And then one day I woke up and I realized, I was a technical writer, and that's not what I meant. So I had to change the mantra. I want to be a well-published fiction author when I grow up. And I'm doing okay. I have 9 novels out, two collections, a picture book, and a few other odds and ends. So today we're going to talk about characters, the good, the bad, and the unlikable. And I want to have this conversation with you. This is not going to be me just talking at you. I don't like to just talk at you, because you're all here because you're interested in reading or writing books, and so I know you have all kinds of information. When I do these kinds of talks, I learn as much as I share typically, and I always want to learn. So we're here to learn from each other, hopefully today. But I will kick it off, and I will say that I think that for protagonists, you can have a protagonist that is good, you can have a protagonist that's bad, you can have a protagonist that's unlikable, you can have a very ambiguous protagonist, and we're just talking protagonists now, we're not talking about all the characters. As long as they're accessible and relatable. I think the real key is that we have to be able to relate to the character. We have to understand their reasons for why they're doing things. So motivation is huge. Lisa Cron has a book out called Story Genius that talks about the root causes and the initial misbeliefs of the character. And if you think of the terms, so she's kind of pushed us, we always talk about the flawed character. What are their flaws, right? But when we think of flaws, we think of things like, what are the opposite of a strength? We think of a weakness. We tend to think, oh, you've got a foible or you've got a flaw. Your flaw is, and a strength can be both. An aspect of personality can be both a strength and a weakness, because you can, once you go over the line, you can take loyalty to a scary place, right? You can take all sorts of aspects of what we would consider strengths to those places where they become a scary thing or a weakness. So loyalty to a fault can become a weakness for a character. So strengths and weaknesses are, that's great, and we need to have them because we don't want Mary Sue's. And what's the male?
Gary Stu.
Gary Stu. Thank you. I knew there was one. You know what? Mary Sue's and Gary Stu's.
Unless you're from Phoenix, in which case it's Clive Cussler.
Yeah. We don't want two perfect characters, because who among us can relate to a perfect character? Wait, I think somebody will raise their hand here. Anybody? Not me. I find if somebody's really too perfect, they scare me because there's something sneaky going on. Been there, experienced that. So it's not really so much about strengths and weaknesses. It's not so much about what you might consider the flaws. But if you think of that misbelief that a character has that they carry with them, that's usually developed at a young age or at an early time in life. An example might be, I'm unlovable. And so as they go through life, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that the ways that they act and the choices they make, they become unloved. If not unlovable, unloved, right? And so that misbelief is that really great button that you can push. You can push their buttons all day long if they have a misbelief that you clearly have developed and understand about your character. And we all have buttons, and they can have more than one button, but that one is key, right? So when I'm working on creating characters, of course, for me, it's really about the voices in my head. And so they annoy me until I start writing their stories. And sometimes they tell me who they are, and sometimes it takes time for them to let me in. I do have one book called Mirabella and the Faded Phantom, in which the character wouldn't let anybody in. Part of her misbelief, her basic misbelief was, you don't want to make friends or get close to anybody because the people that you get close to will die or go away. Right? And so she holds everyone at arm's length, and she uses some very young person techniques for doing that. She calls them scientific experiments, her mother calls them pranks, but the whole idea for her is to just keep people at arm's length. And when I first was writing her, she was keeping me at arm's length, and that was a very difficult book to write because I couldn't figure out who she really was or what the story was, but I kept at it. And now I have a pretty well received middle grade book out of that. So characters can be good, bad, and unlikable. Anybody want to comment on that? Can a character be good, bad, and unlikable?
Sure, look at a most Greek myth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, hubris is the main driver in a lot of them, and I'm sorry, Agamemnon is an ass.
Yeah. And yet we are fascinated. There's almost a train wreck kind of fascination with that, right?
Hey, if you look at the Odyssey, or the Iliad rather, God, there's so many people in there to hate. It's not even funny, and they're the heroes.
Right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But some of that is cultural too, and the times that we live in. I mean, maybe at the time they weren't as unlikable to the audience, but yes, they're pretty unlikable now. I don't know how they would have been more likable then, but I didn't live then, so I'm not going to second guess what I might have.
I'm pretty sure Agamemnon's been an ass.
Everybody thought so?
Yeah.
Everybody thought so even then? Yeah, it's very possible. Yeah.
He's not written in the best light.
Yeah, like what was it about
And
that
yet-
man like 2,500 years ago?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah. And King Lear, I mean,
Oh yeah, he's kind of an ass.
he's a total ass, and yet you just can't look away, right? You just
Yeah.
but let's talk about why that is. What is it that's happening to that character or around that character that makes us so fascinated and so interested in the full story? Anybody?
I'm laughing because I'm thinking, you want to answer that? Ask a Democrat about Donald Trump.
Okay, let's not go there today.
No, we're keeping that out.
So I would think that part of it would be, we'll go back to Agamemnon because I recently reread the Iliad.
I have.
You want to watch him crash and burn.
You want to see
literally
it
wanna
happen.
watch
You know
it
it's
crash.
coming. You want to see it happen.
So
One reason.
that's one way to look at it, but isn't it also a cautionary tale? I mean,
Yeah.
remember that, okay, so where does story come from? Story comes from sitting around the fire at night and talking about, oh, I killed this big bad animal and here's all the meat and we're hoo and we had a really great feast and we're going to eat for months. But Fred ate the berries. You know those berries over there? Well, Fred ate the berries and then his face turned black and then he fell on the ground. And then he writhed, and then Fred didn't get up anymore. And that's a cautionary tale, right? And so, yes,
Switching to television,
sure.
Walter White in Breaking Bad.
Is he unlikable or is he ambiguous? Because there's a bit of
He
a
has
difference.
an arc.
He becomes more unlikable as the story goes along, right?
Yes.
But he started very likable,
Yes.
right? You just had all sorts of empathy for this poor guy. I mean, what else could happen? Here comes the, satellite out of the sky to kill him next. I don't know, all the things were going wrong. Sure, he's very relatable because we've all had bad days, we've all had bad months, we've had bad weeks, sometimes we have bad years. We've all recently had some bad years, I'm sure. But yes, his arc is very interesting because he gets. Anybody here read Black Prism? The Black Prism? So I can't remember the author's name, but this is a really. I don't want to spoil it for you, but if you haven't read it by now, I mean, it's been out for quite some time. The character in there, you're just rooting for the character, and he's such a good guy. And there's a moment when you realize that everything you thought about this character is wrong. And it's just this moment where in your head for me, my head went, wait, what? What? But it's so subtly done. It's so beautifully done that you still want to keep reading. Now you want to find out how this person got to where they are and became that person that is now so ambiguous and has been very unlikable in, that you didn't know about, but now you're finding out how unlikable they have been in their lives. And it's just fascinating. But you're kind of, it's kind of like that really, really good friend you have that does something really to piss you off, and yet you can't let them go because they've been such a good friend for so long. And you're just like, right?
Yeah.
So I thought that is, if you want to find a mentor text for how to write in that kind of a vein and give yourself an opportunity to maybe play with that kind of an arc, it's a really good mentor text. And when I say mentor texts, any book that's published is fair game for mentor text. A mentor text is a book that you look at, you analyze, you take components of it apart to see how it was done. You're not looking to plagiarize, you're not looking to copy. What you're looking for is the big brush strokes, the methodologies that the author has used to accomplish something that you're really impressed with. Like sometimes it might be, I ended up in backstory and I don't even know how I got there. How did they do that? I have to go read that like 3-4 times and see if that was slick, right? it's that kind of thing that I'm talking about when I talk about mentor texts. Now, I will say I also use mentor text for how not to do things. If you read a book and you're reading a book and it's the kind of book that you either at any point from beginning to end want to throw at the wall, then that's a really good sign how not to write. Yes, do not write like that.
There's a good kind of throw it at the wall, but then there's a throw it at the wall and leave it where it lands and let it collect dust and let it die.
Yes, that's the one I'm talking about.
That's the one we're talking about.
That's the one I'm talking about. So let's talk a little bit. You know, we've brought up Walter. We've brought up some very ancient characters. What other characters? Yes.
Okay, this may be controversial, and I'm gonna put a disclaimer. I love this character, Loki from the MCU.
Loki's a lovable scoundrel.
When you get to his to his Disney Plus show, he becomes way more likable. But in other cases, he's both good, bad, and unlikable. He's this whole mix of it.
Right, and that's as per his character.
Yeah.
He you know, it's just like the coyote character in Native American. He is the trickster. He's never going to be quite what he's supposed. You know, and he's never going to be quite honest.
You
and
can't
he
ever
can't.
know him because he's either you suspect he's tricking you or he is actually tricking you.
Yes, or he's setting you up to think he's tricking you, and then later he's going to trick you for really but different. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's a really good example. But we like him, right?
Yeah.
Any examples of characters you start out a book with not liking, and read through the whole book and still there for the ride? Any suggestions? Any? Where's my brain when I need it? There's a whole series of books about a character who's been sent to hell by his friends, and he comes back for revenge. And his only thing is that he's going to come out and he's going to take revenge on these people. And he's doing some terrible things. Like he cuts a guy's head off and keeps it alive in the closet, and and talks to him, questions him whenever he wants to find out new information. Sandman Slim, thank you. The Sandman Slim series. Anybody read that? Yeah, you have. Okay. Do you really like that character at the beginning? Because I didn't. You really don't, but you start to understand, that empathy, that relatability. You understand why he's doing what he's doing, and he becomes less unlikable because he then starts to do the save the cat kind of stuff, where he saves the store, or he's helping people despite himself and despite his main goal. He's getting sidetracked into doing good things. And I think that's a really fascinating study in an unlikable character who we still don't really like him later. He's less unlikable because he's more relatable, right? So it really, for me, it comes down to, can I relate to the character? Can I understand what's driving them? Dr. Horrible. Anybody here a Dr. Horrible fan?
Well, I've seen it.
Okay. I am a huge fan of that character arc because he is, I know there was a panel, where did all the mad scientists go? And he, to me, is one of my favorite mad scientists because he's the epitome of that person who is doing the wrong things for what he believes is the right reasons, right? So he has a complete misbelief about the world and how it should be and how it isn't, and how if he can only influence it in the right ways, whatever that takes, he's going to do it because he wants to make things better in his worldview. And ultimately he becomes this villain because he steps over the line, right? So he takes that desire to do good in the world, which is a strength in most of our heroes, right? And turns it into a bad thing at the end. And it's just such a great exploration in character, of that type of character for me, that's one that I'm keeping, right? I'm keeping that one right here. Any other
Did you say it was
example?
called Dr. Horrible?
Dr. Horrible.
They
It's
kind
a,
of give that away, don't they?
yeah.
It's a very cartoonish thing.
The full title is Dr. Horrible's Sing Along
Yes.
Blog.
Sing along blog.
There is a lot of singing, just beware.
The songs are an integral part.
Yes.
Yes, I actually,
Integral.
okay, bought the video, like it that much as a mentor text and something to study, and also, come on, Patrick. Yeah, come on.
I remember hearing the term, like, if someone is, like, causing problems but not a truly evil character, sometimes they call them the anti-hero.
So, for me, an anti-hero is the person who you're following as a protagonist who's, okay, the Tick is an anti-hero to me. Is anybody a Tick fan? He's always breaking things and doing things, and somehow he stumbles into doing good, even though he's just completely inept. For me, he's an anti-hero. Anybody else want to talk about a definition of anti-hero for them? Yes.
Not for me personally, because anti and hero, that could mean a lot, but for my husband, anti-hero to him is someone who behaves like a villain for the right reasons. So there's a very thin line between them being a bad guy and them being a person who will get justice whatever the cost is. So from perspective, they're an anti-hero or they're a villain.
So back to where we start with Dr. Horrible and then where we end up as villain.
Mhm.
So
I guess it's whether they're likable or not is whether they're an anti-hero or I don't know.
I would submit that it's more the ambiguous hero. Like you say, he's doing bad things for maybe the right reason.
My favorite,
Or-
one of his favorite examples is the Punisher.
Mhm.
And
Right.
that's an anti-hero.
Punisher,
Now that-
Batman,
Yeah.
Wolverine.
That's more of a revenge
Right.
anti-hero.
But he is
I think of
justice ultimately is what he is pursuing.
I think of the
Justice.
John Ringo's The Mercenary.
Mm.
This is a guy who does it for pay.
Mm.
He doesn't care who pays him, but he gets into these situations where he's having to save the village in order to get the guy who's trying to destroy the village.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing.
okay.
Who wrote stuff for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
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 There you go. He's doing good things.
Question on
for the right
structure.
reasons.
So you have a person, I've been advised my first read person, I gotta have some controversy. So is it any better to slowly bring the controversy into it? Little hints like he's getting mad at this person, he's telling this person to back off. And you're seeing one person not fitting the whole picture, everybody's working towards good, and this person's snapping away at it. Is it better to that? Like, he could be brought up in the second book.
Conflict and controversy, I think is what you're talking about.
Mhm.
More conflict and tension is how we kind of address it in structure. And there are a couple of things that conflict does for us. All right, conflict number one reveals character. So you don't have to tell us who the character is. You can show us through conflict. So the best way to do that is to think of it in terms of, if I am going to have lunch with, say, you. What's your name?
Clay.
Clay. Oh, I recognize you now. Okay. Yeah, it's the math. I know that it's very hard. So you and I are going to go out to lunch, right? And I'm going to be on my very best Sharon behavior because I want to impress you. We're going to have lunch together. It's going to be a very nice lunch. Maybe I want to talk to you about something that's important to me. And so we're sitting there, we're having a lovely lunch, and the waitress comes over, and something happens, and I get coffee spilled in my lap. Now, that's conflict, because I have now had hot coffee spilled in my lap. It's not conflict with you, but it is conflict. I've had something happen to me that sets up conflict. Now, how I react reveals who I am as a person. I can jump up and scream and yell and curse and holler and call names at the waitress or the waiter or whoever spilled the coffee, and just be a total meltdown, whatever. And that would reveal to you a side of me that you weren't seeing before. Or I could get up, get the napkins, start cleaning up, saying, "I'm so sorry, no, it was my fault, don't worry about it, it'll be fine." That also reveals If it were that reaction, that would reveal a different side of who I might be, right? We're all multifaceted. We all have different kinds of emotional responses inside of us. Good, the bad, and the unlikable, just like our characters. And conflict will reveal character. So that's number one. That's a great use for controversy and character in a story. The other thing is that conflict drives the story along because it forces your character to act. So the use of conflict in a story is to put up roadblocks for your character that they then have to either jump over, break down, or go around, right? So you're trying to cause them to make a choice. So the way that we look at it, we look at the situation that your character is currently in, whatever that might be from at any point in the book. Then they act or make a choice. So you have a situation and they have to react to that. So they react by making a choice or taking action. That sets up a consequence. That consequence creates the new situation, and then they have to act again. And that is a loop forward that drives your story in this nice rolling manner to move the story forward. So how you create your controversy is entirely up to you. You can set up the world's going to end at the beginning and then put all the roadblocks in the way before your character gets there to the world ending. Or you can have small inklings of how bad things are going until you reveal that the world, oh gosh, now we're at a place where the world's going to end. I have a book where I did that, where we don't know that the outcome is going to be that this whole town is going to implode and the wall between worlds is going to implode until we get to that point, and now it's a true crisis, right? But you can set it up any way you want for what works for your book and your genre. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But that's how you want to use those tools. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is, because he increments, he's getting to be less and less popular with the main character, and he's getting like irritated. Finally, he says, "This is going to stop," and then, but I let it go with that for a while. He says, "Yeah, I solved that problem," and then he's going to appear again later.
Yeah, you want to keep setting up roadblocks though, because that's what keeps the reader engaged. Because we're interested in the journey. I'm sure if you've been in my other panels, you've heard me say this. For me, a book is like a road trip. You're getting in the car with someone. Who is it you're getting in the car with? Who's driving the car? That's your protagonist typically, right? Your main character. And do you want to get in the car with somebody who's truly unlikable and despicable? Probably not. I'm not. This is not the story for me. But you could get in the car with someone who's somewhat unlikable because they're just interesting. They're that interesting, and you want to see where they're going to go, right? But you're going to spend hours with this person. Books take hours to read for readers, and we want to give them a road trip that's worth their time and their energy. Because as Scott was pointing out, I think it was Scott Hadley was pointing out, books take energy. It's not like you can sit in front of them and they feed you the images. Your brain has to work to translate what's on the page into the story and the images. And brain science with books and stories is so exciting, because they apparently have done a study where they took an audiobook, same audiobook, and they have people kind of wired up on two sides of the country, and they start the audiobook at the same exact time, and the same areas of their brains tend to light up as the story goes on. So cool. Yes, and that's the geeky part of writing. The sciencey, nerdy part of writing is that there's all this brain science behind it, and you want readers' brains to light up when they're reading your work, because that's how you know they're getting that experience. Reading stories are experiential. You know, we want to experience what it's like to be another character and not have to face those actual dangers, but know what it might feel like. We want to be scared sometimes. We want to get that creepiness. We want to be exposed to that. For whatever reason, the human brain wants to have all those experiential opportunities. And so that's what we want to do, right? We want to give them that. What other questions or comments? Anything else? Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking Fisk from Daredevil. He's a character who wants to make a better world. He's a likable character, but he's not a good character. And I also, on Walter Wright, I find him a horrible character. He is a monster from start to finish. The only thing is you lose what he's trying to hide on him. He starts off evil and unlikable, and he just gets more unlikable. He's gonna die, and he's gonna take as many people out with him.
But is
It's
he? But
just, yeah.
But people related to him.
And I don't know why.
Well, I don't know. It's the struggle and that feeling like the whole world's against you. We've all had that moment. Who here has not experienced a moment where it felt like the universe is out to get me? Come on, anybody? You know, come on, because I've had moments where I've been like, what the hell, universe? What I do? And you know, it's just, we all feel like that, and I think, and that's where we touch on back to relatability. They can be good, they can be bad, they can be unlikable, they can be ambiguous. Characters can be just like people. Oh, wait, we want them to be like real people. That's important. We want them to be multifaceted. We want them to feel like I want my readers to put down the book later and then have them come to me and say, God, I hated that woman. And because, yeah, me too. I hated her too. That's why I wrote her like that. You know, because she was all those women put together, or all those personality things put together of the times that I've had interactions with certain people that really pissed me off.
Where's Jack Fowler when we really need him?
Right.
Currently not sleeping 24 hours.
But I want my characters to be realized to that level. I want readers to think about them after the story's over. Like I'm still thinking about The Midnight Library by Matt Haig and Nora Seed, who, by the way, whose last name is actually symbolic of a big theme in that story. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to leave it there because I want you to read that book. It's a really good book. So she's realized to me. I realize her as a person. This is a woman who is suffering from depression, and she's getting kicked, and then she gets kicked again, and she gets kicked again, and she gets kicked again, and then she makes a choice, and then we're so bought in to we're worried about her, and we're so bought into what she's going to do next that we can't help but follow her story through, right? We got to know. We got to know how it turns out for Nora. It's just like, those are the kinds of stories that resonate best with me. Now, you can have an action story. Who here reads Murderbot? You want to talk about an ambiguous, okay.
Love Murderbot.
Right? But such an ambiguous character.
Well, he's kind of the classic, he does the right thing for the wrong reasons.
Right?
Because he really just wants to watch television.
Right?
Just leave me alone, watch my soap operas, you know?
It's such a
I gotta
fascinating
solve this problem so I
character.
can go back and watch my TV.
And yet we read it and we're relating, because who here hasn't ever felt like, oh, world, just leave me alone so I can go. I just want to go. For me, it's World of Warcraft. I just want to play my game, you know, or I just want to write, or, you know, who here hasn't felt like that? And it's so weird because I didn't think I would relate to that character at all. And then, because everybody was telling me about it before I read it, and then I was like, oh, I see why people read this. So, really, character, the importance of it is you can write your characters any way you want, as long as they're accessible and relatable. I mean, those are really the bottom lines.
And interesting.
Interesting, well, and engaging. You know, you want to engage. And ways to do that are to make sure that you show, don't tell. You reveal character through conflict. You get it on you do that in scene. So that, okay, here's the show, don't tell spiel. We hear this a lot, and people kind of get it in their heads that they have to, what's the difference between showing and telling? Showing is in scene, actually happening, the actions are taking place, the conversations are taking place. Telling is summary, typically summarization of some aspect. That's the easiest way I can explain it. Yes.
You know, I hear that a lot, and that's how I kind of did the drafts of the novel. I'll get a couple of drafts going on a trilogy, a couple of books. But then in reading it, I found that people don't feel like they're getting to know the characters enough, part of it, because there's not enough what's going on in their head. So, I just wondered if you could speak to that.
I was coming right up. Thank you for that. Yeah, nice. I'll pay you later for feedback. Another way to do it to keep characters engaging is to get emotion on the page. And getting the emotion on the page can be done in a couple of different ways. One is through showing how they see the world, sense the world. So here's a really good example of character emotion on the page, or character emotion. So on a good day, I go out into my living room and I look around at my shelves, and over here I've got my Harley Barbies, and over here I've got all my Lord of the Rings action figures, and back here I've got Godzilla and Mechagodzilla, and Mechagodzilla has a Godzilla hand puppet that he's mocking Godzilla with. And this is how my brain is inside, and so my living room is reflective of that. And I'm like, this is me, this is who I am, and the cats are there, and the sun is shining in through the window, and I'm just like, this is who I am. I border on hoarder, but only border, and I'm happy, and it feels good, and I see the bright sun coming in through the window, and I feel comfortable, and it colors the lens through which I'm seeing the world. On a bad day, I walk into my living room and I haven't dusted in 2 years. It's like, oh my God, it's just awful. It's just terrible. And the sun that's coming in through the window is showing me all the floaters and the cat hair. And what the hell? I can't even sit on my couch in black pants because my cat's been there. And my whole viewpoint has been colored by a different emotion that I brought into the room with me. Because as a person, as people, we have different emotions. If I get up grumpy, or if I come home grumpy, and I see my own, that's one setting, one environment that I can see multiple different ways, right? Or there's a storm, and I realize that I have this really sturdy double brick walled house, and it's not going anywhere. And the electricity might go out, but I have a little lamp and I can still read. So I'm feeling safe. It's the emotion through which we see the world. This is how we want to show our characters in story. What they're feeling should be reflected in how they're seeing and sensing and speaking. So words like that I might use for a character who's in my living room on a good day is, it's a bright and sunny day, and this coffee is really nice, and I have a really nice mug from my indie bookstore, and this is lovely, and I'm happy, and I'm comfortable. It's comfortable words. I'm going to stroll across my living room, strolling or sauntering, or I might even twirl through the room or dance. How I'm moving in the world, how I'm acting in the world is all nuanced by the word choice that you use for how you show us what the characters are doing and saying and feeling, right? Same thing on the dark side. I might scuffle across the room, or shuffle across the room, or just stop dead in the doorway and stare on a bad day. That is also showing rather than telling. And when you show with nuanced language, it lights up the brain, and the reader gets it, right? The reader gets it, and that emotion that you're trying to convey is conveyed into their hearts and into their heads. So that is emotion through character lens. Now through sensory detail, that's visual. We just did visual. We did visual because visual is primary for humans. But you can do the same thing with all 5 senses, right? The sense of smell, like nuanced words, like, does the baking smell good, or does it smell bad? Or can I smell the garbage can or the cat litter box, and is that what I'm focusing on? Because your emotions are causing you to focus on certain things. When we're feeling negative, we tend to focus on the negative. When we're feeling positive, we tend to focus on the positive. And characters should do the same. And that's the best tool I can give you for getting emotion on the page. I have some worksheets for that I use in my book coaching as well and in my teaching. So just make a note of that. And does that answer the question?
It's very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, good.
And when you see me leaving in 5 minutes, it's just because I have to check out.
It's fine. It's fine. I get it. Any other questions? Any other craft questions about how to show a character or structure their journey or any of that? Because all of that relates to what we're talking about. We're talking about character really deep down. Yeah.
Well, in my case, I'm showing how the lead character failed and shows his vulnerability, and therefore, so far he's been the expert, and all of a sudden, boom, it drops, and you pick him back up and go forward. So that kind of.
Okay, so yes, the other aspect of that, because tagging off you and also off the previous question, is thoughts on the page. The internal dialogue that you give for your characters can be also important. So sometimes we want them thinking, and we don't want to have to say they thought. We're getting away from that in craft nowadays. So when you see the structure of craft, a lot of times you don't see that anymore. So when you have a character, here's a really good way to do this. If you have a character thinking, go through your manuscript and do a search on thought and look and see if you can change that into either an action item that shows what they're feeling. He slammed his fist on the table. Damn it, he should have done a better job. That is, you don't have to say he thought. We get it, right? We've all felt that way. And so what you're doing is giving us how he felt in a way that we can relate to. And we're going to absorb that. And then the same thing with, when we talked I talked earlier about the sensory words. Go through your manuscript and look for places where where you say smelled, heard, walked. Walked is a big one because you can nuance the heck out of that word. You can nuance that word so many ways. Get a thesaurus. They have them online now. You nuance the crap out of that. So any of the sensory, felt, I felt. Get rid of all those if you can. Also, dialogue tags. We're getting away from dialogue tags in craft now. We're not even using said, we're using action tags. So again, damn it, I should have saw that coming and slammed his fist on the table. You don't have to say he said. And if you know who the character is. Now we use said when we need to ensure that you know who's speaking. And we want to avoid pronouns that are confusing to people. So especially if you have more than two people in a room having a conversation. But for the most part, you can get rid of those dialogue tags. You can just dump them, and then it tightens your manuscript and it moves the reader's pace up. So
I do thoughts in italic first person, which brings the reader into the head of the character. Gee, I never should have done that.
If you're in first person present, or if you're in first person through the whole novel, and you're first person close, you don't even have to use italics anymore.
No, I usually write in
third person. Yeah. Okay, and then yes, and then in that case, I would go with italics for thoughts. But for the most part, we're also getting away from using italics for thoughts, but more in the first person direct. Yeah, so you don't need them there. Because we know it's the character thinking. Slammed his fist. I should have done better. It doesn't have to be in italics. So, what else? I'd love to talk about this stuff. This is where my joy is. Yeah.
I sometimes lead into not saying thought, but he remembered.
Yeah, so if you're going to do a flashback or if you're going to share a memory, yes, we do need to cue some way. It doesn't have to be he remembered. It can be it was just like that time when. If there are ways to do it so that you can switch up your language so that it's not always using the same exact words, so the reader doesn't start to see. We are trained, we're genetically, scientifically, humans look for patterns. Our brains look for patterns. So if you use the same phrase over multiple times, or the same personal tick for a character over and over and over, you want to be judicious about that, because our brains start to see the patterns and it starts to look very repetitive. So just be aware of that. So try to change your language up a little bit here and there and not use the same phrase every time for a memory. Yes?
Just kind of along those lines, there was some thinking a few years back that dialogue tags, like said, become invisible to the reader until audiobooks started to become popular, and then all of a sudden you notice it.
Yeah.
So a good tip, if you want to use those ticks judiciously, is to read your work out loud. Mm-hmm. And you'll find all kinds of, oh, well, I have that word here, but I also use it here. Let's make some changes or shift things around.
Yeah, and there are actually programs that'll read it to you now, so you can just put it on your computer and say, read this to me. And it doesn't read it with the nice thing about that is that it doesn't read with emphasis where you think the emphasis would be. It just reads it, and so now you're starting to hear all of the things that might sound odd in a way that, rather than you reading it out loud with knowing the voice and the emphasis. So there's that can be helpful as well. Yes.
I was just curious, can you speak to creating the villain of the piece without having them be so cool they take over, and without having them, making them vivid without having them take over or become a caricature? So
first of all, the villain is the hero of their own story. Always, they have their own misbeliefs. If you look at, I do character sheets with a lot of my authors because, partly because of that, and partly because of what you were talking about is how do you set up the tension and the conflict throughout and have it ramp up. And so I'll do character sheets with my clients where I have them do the protagonist, the antagonist, the secondary characters, and even the tertiary characters. And the reason for that is because what we're looking for is setting up all the characters' big world views and big ideas, like what do they think about life and death? What do they think about religion? What do they think about politics? What do they think about money? What do they think about all these things, right? And then you can use that to make them bump up against each other, or to put them in the way of your protagonist, or to even just have an argument, which also reveals character and reveals internal thinking in a way that's more organic than to try and tell us what somebody thought. So I do that with the villains, and we want to make sure that the villain, of course, is powerful enough that they might not be that your protagonist may not be able to overcome. There's got to be a question in our mind. That's why with the Midnight Library with Nora Seed and life and death being the issue, death is a pretty big antagonist, right? But it's not even an evil antagonist. It just is what it is. So when we look at villains, and villains can be, if you're talking about villains who are people specifically and who are characters in the story, because that's a whole nother discussion, what kinds of conflicts we can set up. But you want to first make them real. You want to make them very multifaceted. You want to, and I'm going to pull one from Save the Cat and say, give them something that we can relate to. A family they care about, a loss, and that's the reason why they are who they are. Unrequited love. Something about them that's relatable helps humanize them and keep them from being a caricature. So that's the first piece there. And the mwahahaha's, let's leave that in the comic books. And then you just have to make sure that your protagonist is a little bit smarter or cleverer or can figure it out. Because Harry Potter was not more powerful than Voldemort until he had his gang together, but he kept managing to outsmart him. And sometimes almost by accident, but mostly because of his friends, right? So, you know, you can make them as powerful as you want as long as you make sure that your protagonist has the ability or learns how to outsmart, outwit, or outgun them.
I think use of the term villain even sets up the kind of story you're writing. Because most of the time my villains aren't villains, they're just competitors. They have their own agenda. It's not an illegitimate agenda, it's not even an evil agenda. It just crosses with the protagonist.
Right.
And very often, in my latest soon-to-be published book, the bad guy really thinks he's doing good stuff.
Yeah.
He's protecting his loved ones.
Yeah.
Not in the way that really is a good way to do it.
Hero of
but
his own story, right there.
Yeah.
So that I think I hope that answers your question about that. But let's also talk a little bit about conflict and what kinds of conflict there are in the world now. And we used to talk about what some of you are as old as I am, you know, maybe a couple. I'm kind of up there. But we used to, in grade school or in middle school or wherever, maybe high school for some of us, we learned about the 4 key kinds of conflict, and we're going to bring it forward language-wise. We're going to call it person against person, you know, person against other, person against self. That's my internal conflicts. So how am I fighting against myself? Well, I really ought to do this, but I want to do that. We all do that. It's like, I really want to play World of Warcraft, but I got to go do client work. You know, we all do that. So we have these internal conflicts. Then it's person against nature. And that can be, you know, we see a lot of that in, all the red shirts that die on the planet because the planet eats them. That's person against nature. And it's person against society. And we see a lot of that in dystopian, where the teenagers are right and all the adults are wrong, and they messed everything up and they have to fight against it, like in the Hunger Games and things like that. But there's also another column now, and in fact, I've been talking about this for a number of years, where I put magic and technology, because of fantasy, we have, you know, magic that can be a major conflict, how it works, how it backfires. But technology, who here hasn't beat their head against a keyboard? You know, I know I have many times, and hated on my computer, even though it's not trying to be conflicting, I think, most of the time. But it's a big barrier sometimes for me to get my work done. And you're starting to actually see, if you start to go out online and look at forms of conflict, people are pinging on that, and now you're seeing that people are actually layering in. There's like 7 types of conflict now in the world of story, and things like that. So, yeah. What was my point? My point was you have lots to choose from to set up barriers for, or even just annoyances for your characters on both sides of the table, of the aisle. Your hero, your villain, whomever that is. But it could be as simple as villains and heroes that do this. But antagonists and protagonists can often just do this. It can be I'm trying to do this. No, I'm trying to do this. What Bruce was talking about. No, but I'm trying to do this, but I'm trying to do this. It's not a head butt direct. It's competing goals that get in each other's ways along the way. So there are a lot of ways to do this. A lot of exciting ways. Yes, do you have a question?
Well, kind of like in the Fifth Element, where our hero and the villain, they never actually even see each other or interact with each other in the entire movie. Like, they pass by each other like seconds between in some scenes. Mm-hmm. And theoretically, you know, our hero was originally employed by one of the villain's companies, but they never actually interact. They never see each other.
Right.
They don't.
There's a manipulative aspect.
They don't even know they exist. So.
Yeah. We have about 6 more minutes. Anything else? Anybody else want to pick my brain or make a comment? Or
What was the name of that first mentor you mentioned?
mentor text?
Mm-hmm.
The first one?
Uh-huh. I wanted to remember.
Black Prism?
Black Prism.
No, the one before that.
Genius.
Oh, Story Genius?
Story
That's not a mentor text. That's a craft book.
Okay.
Yeah, Story Genius. Anything by Lisa Cron.
Lisa Cron?
Lisa Cron. Her last name is spelled C-R-O-N.
Thank you.
Yeah. She also does some TED Talks, and I think she's got an online course that you can take as well. But, I'm a book learner, so everybody learns differently. I'm more of a book learner. So I like to synthesize what I get out of a book. I love books. I can talk books all day, so anything else? Any other comments? Buy my books.
Most of the books, wonderful.
Buy my books. Come get a bookmark. Look me up online. I also, like I said, I do developmental and line editing for authors. I did a developmental edit for a book last year that went out and got itself a starred Kirkus review after the author did 99% of what I asked him to do. Yes?
What genres do you do?
Speculative fiction, pretty much all of them. And I also do most age categories. I have some cards here. You can look me up online. I don't do graphic horror. I do poetry. It's not advertised because that's a very intimate and personal. But I did just do a couple of poetry edits that I got some very nice feedback on. Poetry editing is an art form that isn't for everyone because you have to really understand the intent of what the poet is trying to do. But I do have cards up here. Please feel free to take one. I have a free email newsletter that comes out once a month with free writing tips, my blog posts, my podcasts, all the things. And if you sign up, you get a free character art sheet. So sign up for my email. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Creative Play-In Podcast Network. If you enjoyed our show, please check out D&D Journey of the 5th Edition and Ragnarok Enroll a Scion Hero to Ragnarok Story. Also, check out our Patreon page for more content and behind-the-scenes things, as well as joining us for a one-shot game or two.